The Miami Dolphins have a bunch of holes on their roster. I'm Connor from the Dolphins Dive, and I'm here to break down what the Miami Dolphins need to upgrade this offseason. Now, don't worry, Dolphins fans.
Don't freak out. I forbid anybody to freak out.
It's not the end of the world. A lot of these holes aren't huge, desperate needs. They're kind of just a depth addition is needed here or there, or a starter that isn't really expensive in terms of the NFL market. But I'm going to start with the offensive side of the ball and where the Dolphins have their holes. Starting with the running back position, the Dolphins have a great running back room of Raheem Mostert, Devon Achane, Jeff Wilson, who's a potential cut candidate. But the only really addition that could be added to this room that I think would help boost it is a power running back. And that can be acquired in many different ways, whether that's a low-level free agent, whether that's a high-level free agent. I know some Dolphins fans want Derrick Henry. I don't know how realistic that is. Or you can get a late-round running back in the draft, or even an undrafted free agent with some power. It can really be found anywhere, and that's why it's not a really huge hole or something to worry about. The next position of need for the Miami Dolphins is the wide receiver position. And once again, you might be like, the Dolphins have Tyreek and Waddle. What do you need? What do you mean that they have holes? But they just lack depth. We only have 3 receivers under contract, which is Tyreek, Waddle, and Eric Ezukama. The Dolphins just need some depth, whether that's bringing River Craycraft back or just drafting people late. Once again, not a major need, but something the Dolphins do need to address this free agency. The next need for the Miami Dolphins, similar to the past two, is not a desperate need, but more of a luxury addition if possible, and that's the tight end position. Durham Smythe is a good blocker, and that's what this scheme really desires, is a good blocking tight end. But if you can get more athletic at that position and add more of a pass-catching upside, it only helps this offense out even more. So I wouldn't say it's a desperate need. Durham Smythe did his job at a pretty high level, was hurt for half the year, and once he got more healthy, he was better. But if you upgrade the position, it won't hurt and will only benefit this offense. And now the next need for the Miami Dolphins is a backup left tackle. It's basically announced Tron Armstead will be returning to the Miami Dolphins, which I have no issue with. When healthy, he's one of the best tackles in football. Key caveat, when he's healthy, which is not very often, so you need to make sure you have a good backup left tackle for Tron Armstead, whether that's keeping Kendall Lamb or even drafting a tackle in the first round to be his backup in the future, because Armstead's probably got 1 year left in him. So I would be all for the various different ways you plan to address that position, whether it be first round pick, late round pick, or even cheap free agent. Now, continuing with our needs, and this is a big hole for the Miami Dolphins and a legitimate concern that the Dolphins need to get addressed in this free agency, and that's majority of this offensive line. Obviously, backup left tackle is important, but it's at least not the starting position. But we have 3 holes on the starting offensive line, potentially from left guard to right guard and center in between. We're losing starters at all 3 positions in Isaiah Wynn, Connor Williams, and Robert Hunt, and hopefully the Dolphins can bring half of them back, two of the 3. I don't know how likely that is going to happen. Robert Hunt's projected a pretty big contract. I don't see the Dolphins necessarily paying that. So the Dolphins need to get starters at maybe left guard, right guard, center. Liam Eichenberg was serviceable at center.
You did not just say that.
Definitely outperformed Dolphins fans' expectations. He also played banged up, so that has to be taken into account. Yes, he wasn't Connor Williams level. He wasn't bad, but he was also playing hurt. So he's probably got more upside than he even showed us because he was hurt and made a position switch halfway through the season. So a full season of center under his belt, a full training camp. Liam Eichenberg has good potential at that position based off what he showed us in the past. So maybe the Dolphins don't view it as a need. I'm not saying that's what they should view it, but in terms of desperation, you might have a starting center already on the guard positions. Robert Jones could be your starting guard. He's a restricted free agent, which means he should be pretty cheap to retain, but he's not a great starter. He's a serviceable backup, serviceable starter, but not necessarily the amount of potential you'd like to see at the position. So the Dolphins need to address these holes, whether it's free agency, and that's the thing, and that's the benefit of having holes at these positions. The Dolphins have a lot of the key positions that cost a lot of money already under contract. So you can get a quality guard in free agency for anywhere under $3 to $4 million. Isaiah Wynn, prior to the injury, was playing pretty dang well for the Dolphins, and we signed him to like a $2 million deal. So you can get quality to play out of these positions for pretty cheap. And in the draft, really, I would say you could feel confident in the pick, 3rd round or under. Obviously, you have to hit on the pick, but you can find these players pretty cheap anywhere, whether it's draft or free agency. But left guard, center, and right guard need to be addressed in various different ways. I don't know how McDaniel in the front office views our current players under roster, whether it's Liam Eichenberg or Robert Jones, but Hopefully we can maybe bring 2 of the free agents back. I'd love to see Robert Hunt remain a Dolphin. I just don't know how realistic it is. But those are definitely needs for the Dolphins to help bolster this offensive line play and keep Tua upright. Now on to the defensive side of the ball, and this is where things get hairy, starting with the interior defensive line with Christian Wilkins, a looming free agent. I'd love for the Dolphins to bring him back, but if they don't, then they have a clear hole at a starting defensive line position. And that is a position that can be replaced, not necessarily at the level of Christian Wilkins, but for the cost of Christian Wilkins. I was talking to a buddy about this earlier today. Christian Wilkins is going to cost north of $20 million per year, whether it's a franchise tag, whether it's an extension. You could probably get a quality, not high-end, but a quality interior defensive line that's going to stop the run first and not really provide much upside in terms of pass rush, but be serviceable for maybe under $8 million a year, and then you compare that with a starting safety and starting inside backer for about the price of Christian Wilkins. And those are the questions that Chris Grier and his staff has to ask themselves is it really worth putting the money there? I love Christian Wilkins. I want to see him back. But I'm just saying these are the conversations that need to be had in terms of how to construct the rest of this roster. But interior defensive line, as long as Christian Wilkins is still a free agent, is a need. Whether that wants to be addressed, you could address it in the first round of the draft. You can address it with a couple cheap free agent signings, whether it's kind of older veterans that can help rotate in, but it needs to be addressed nonetheless. Next need for the defensive side of the ball is the edge position. With Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips both coming back from their injuries, they may or may not be back for week 1, but regardless, it usually takes those guys time to recover from the injury, even when they're back on the field to fully be themselves. So would love to see some additional depth added to the rest of this roster. With Andrew Van Ginkel set to become a free agent, the Dolphins really don't have any depth at the position, so it needs to be addressed. Whether, once again, this could be addressed in the first round of the draft, because at the Dolphins' current pick, you really just have to take best player available. So whether it's a tackle, interior lineman, edge, you got to take it. So it could be addressed anywhere from free agency, bringing back Andrew Van Ginkel, which I'm a big fan of, to the first round of the draft. But it is a concern for the Dolphins that they need to add some depth to the defensive edge position. I swear it's not as bad as it seems. The Dolphins have a lot of holes, but a lot of these are going to be fixed really soon, whether it's cheap free agents or in the draft. So there's only a couple of really glaring holes, but the next hole for the Miami Dolphins is going to be at inside linebacker, assuming Jerome Baker gets cut. If he does not get cut, then you have Jerome Baker and David Long, and you feel pretty comfortable about that. But with expecting Jerome Baker to get cut, you only really have David Long. You really need 2 quality starting linebackers, especially in modern NFL where it's a lot of nickel defense. You really only have 2 linebackers on the field. David Long had a good season for the Dolphins, so you want to look to pair someone next to him, whether that's, once again, a cheap free agent, which at inside backer you can get. You're not going to get the cream of the crop for cheap, but you can get quality. Think about David Long is a quality linebacker, and the Dolphins got him for about $5 million a year, which isn't bad. So you can get a quality inside backer, whether it's cheap in free agency or in the draft as well. You can get a quality linebacker in the second, third round pretty consistently. So should be interesting to see how the Dolphins look to address the linebacker position, as well as there's potential chance for development. None of us expected Austin Jackson to have the year he had, and he's blossomed into our starting right tackle. Maybe Channing Tindall is one of those guys. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but if you listen to Coach Anthony Weaver, our defensive coordinator, talk about development and player development, he's very keen on making sure you try and maximize players' careers, and I think he's going to look to develop players that maybe Vic Fangio wasn't willing to do. All right, I'm almost done with this list. Second to last need, Dolphins are probably at need of a corner. Assuming Xavier Howard gets cut, they need someone to pair along with Jalen Ramsey. Now, the Dolphins have a lot of depth at this position. They have Jalen Ramsey, they have Kader Kohu, they have Cam Smith, as well as Ethan Bonner, which the coaching staff seem pretty promised by. So they have a lot of young talent on this secondary with like the last 3 names I mentioned, but you'd like to see them add a veteran if they do choose to cut Xavier Howard. And how that gets addressed should be interesting, whether it's, once again, a cheap free agent. Maybe they get maybe a more higher-end free agent, maybe make a trade. But I think you can feel comfortable with Ramsey. I know Kader Kohu had a down year, but in a new defensive scheme, which is going to look to maximize some players, I think you can feel confident in one of either Cam Smith, Kader Kohu, Ethan Bonner, one of those guys to make up a starting corner and feel good about it. So really look to add just one more name into the mix, and it's a veteran, and maybe he gets beat out by Cam Smith or Ethan Bonner. You'd love to see that happen, but I don't think a big investment is needed, but you'd like to see them add someone at the position. So not a desperate need, but a need nonetheless. And I know it sounds like I'm going on and on about the needs, but as I mentioned before, it's not as bad as it seems. But the last need for the Miami Dolphins is at the safety position, with Deshaun Elliott and Brandon Jones both hitting free agency. I'd love to see the Dolphins bring both of them back. It shouldn't be overly expensive to do so, but who knows how it'll all pan out. Once again, safety, like most of these positions I've listed, the Dolphins did a good job, and I think I heard Kyle Krabs mention this. They did a phenomenal job of, they already have their money in place at the really premium positions, whether it's offensive tackle, receiver, edge positions, corner, we have some money invested in. We really have the expensive positions already taken care of. So a lot of this you can go discount shopping and still get quality players. Think about last year, Deshaun Elliott, we signed to like a $2 million deal, and he was a very good safety for us. So if we can bring him back on a similar kind of deal or make a similar kind of signing this free agency, there's also usually good safeties that fall to the second, third, fourth round of the draft that you can really get anywhere. So as much as some of these needs seem like we have a lot, you can really get them for cheap and pretty consistently in free agency at a low cost. So despite the cap issues that I already made a video on how we can clear $100 million, it's not as bad as it seems. I know a lot of Dolphins fans are concerned that we're going to get worse. And on paper, there's a chance because we're losing a lot of players. We might lose Christian Wilkins. We might lose Robert Hunt. We might lose Connor Williams. They really need to properly execute this free agency and the draft, which I think is possible. Like I said, a lot of this is just, you're going to have to really quality shop some of the cheaper free agents, which I think is doable. Think about the Ravens signing Kyle Van Noy to a very cheap deal, and he ended up being a star edge player for them. So it is possible. The Dolphins can get better, especially with new defensive coaching that's going to emphasize on development. Comment down below. What do you want to see the Dolphins dress first? Thank you guys for watching, and until next time, fins up.